Welcome back. Connor Happer, Josh Hodson with you on the Connor Happer Show. You're in 1620 The Zone and 1620 The Zone. Back from home base here today. Game 3 of the College World Series Championship Series tonight between Tennessee and Texas A&M. Trev Alberts has a chance to bring home a national championship.
Finally.
He'll be solely responsible for it. We're joined now on the 42 Degrees of Source hotline by Sam McKewon from the Omaha World Herald. Hi, Sam. What's going on?
Hey, man. We're finally reached the end. It's the hottest day of all time, but we reached the end of the CWS.
We made the executive decision to we were originally supposed to be out at our spot across the street from the stadium, and we made the executive decision to say, actually, I think we'll go back home today and do the show.
Smart move.
Yeah, I thought it was
smart move. You know, all that's left to do now is crown a champion, and two very similar teams. We'll see how it turns out, but it's been a really good CWS. Maybe not last year. It's not quite last year, but it's awfully darn good, and the sport has found its stride, and the event has found its stride down at Trop Field for sure.
Yeah. Any sense on which way it goes tonight? I think there's a lot of things that go into it, and they've split these first two games. Obviously, the championship series. It's probably the best two teams in the country, and they're playing for a winner-take-all championship. Any sense on the way it goes tonight?
I think Tennessee wins. I kind of felt like A&M needed to finish it yesterday. The way that game went and the way that Tennessee took the lead late, just feel like the Vols are going to finish it off tonight. They'll have a big crowd advantage.
Yeah.
So that's what I think.
What's your takeaway from Nebraska grabbing a kind of, I don't know about a surprise commitment, but another interesting addition to its 2024 roster here with Mekhi Nelson, who's going to reclass back to 2024. It's another running back in the room. It becomes a really interesting room with a bunch of guys who are either have a history of being banged up or haven't really played much. I guess what's your takeaway on that addition today?
Yeah, it's interesting. This is the second guy that EJ signed from back east, and this is his guy. Like, this is not, a 4-star or, a guy that's been recruited by a lot of folks. Quentin Ives was the same story. Mekhi is too, Mekhi Nelson. And one of these guys has to hit, because if you're going to take guys that were otherwise going to UConn, you've got to develop them and coach them up. Certainly Nebraska has the room, the way that they sort of navigate their scholarships, but Jamarian Parker, who's in the 25 class, is the best running back in terms of just the recruiting rankings and all the rest. So Nelson's a compact guy. He reminds me a little bit of Fleek and a little bit of Will Nixon. This is a guy that you can probably put in a slot. He can probably work a little bit in space. He's not undersized. He's 5'11" and a half, 190 pounds. That's not undersized for a running back. But he runs with some oomph behind his pads. Not a burner. Parker's a burner. That's the first guy that they've had since Mo Washington, who really can pull away. But he doesn't get here until next year. I think it's a decent pickup late. Remember, they didn't have a 24 signee because Keywan Lacey decommitted and then ended up going to Missouri. So this fills the role for 24. They probably had that spot open, but you're getting to the point where the roster's awfully large, and you got to manage everybody that's there. And again, Rhule has been very open to being aggressive with how large the roster is. That said, there's a couple of positions where they've recruited a lot of guys, and they've got and they're kind of flyers, and some of these guys got to pan out. Like you don't want to have a situation where you're signing a ton of guys that are just sort of tweeners, and then they never quite fill into a role. And I think Nelson's a player who could be very good here, but it's going to have to earn his spot, and will have to certainly compete with Parker when Parker gets here.
Well, you wrote about this for today, just the roster limits and how that could potentially change. Obviously, Rhule's been a huge proponent of keeping it large, although he has shown the ability to adapt. But he's used the roster numbers to his advantage so far in his time, and it's a part of his kind of development plan. What do you think? Like, how does the game change for Nebraska in the way that they're trying to do things right now, if indeed there are some more strict roster limits on who could be there?
I think it depends on the roster size. If you go to 130, I don't know. I don't know that there's a ton. I think what happens if the limit is 130 is you maybe move away from we're going to sign, a bunch of scholarship-worthy players who we think might leave in a year or two anyway if they don't get starting jobs because they want to play. I don't know that it greatly affects your walk-on program. I think if you get down into 120, it probably does affect it a little bit. So people have framed this as a walk-on issue, and I'm not saying it isn't. But if they say the roster limit is 130, then probably what you're doing is you're looking at the guys that, and everybody kind of knows who these guys are. The 3-star guys that you're surprised they're signing. They're over the 85 scholarship, but they're coming here anyway, and they're probably coming on some sort of NIL in kind deal.
Definitely.
And the reality is, you don't expect all those guys to stay. Like, it's very unlikely that you're going to have, 24 or whatever, 23 scholarship-worthy defensive backs in the program in 2 years. Those guys want to play football, and so some of them won't play here, and then they'll see the writing on the wall and exit stage left. But the way that they're building it's very clever, because if you can create a system where you don't really have walk-ups. These are scholarship-worthy guys, and then they all compete with each other, and then the best ones emerge, then you're creating a better roster. If they go down to 120, you may have to curb that approach. I don't think Matt Rhule would cut too deeply into the walk-on system because those guys stick around for 4 years. They're willing to sort of battle it out. And, hey, I'm willing to play in my redshirt junior year, my 4th year on special teams. I don't know. I think they're like at 40-some freshmen for this class, and it was probably very similar to that number for 23. I just don't know that all those guys are going to stick around for 4 years, and we can all imagine who some of those guys are.
Yeah.
Guys they signed late that are just like, I came here to play, and if I'm not going to play by the end of year 2, I'm going to leave. Like, I'm not sticking around. I mean, they're not really a walk-on per se. And so that may get curbed. I think Nebraska can survive at 130 without much fun. 120, you probably cut into it a little bit. I probably would be an advocate. I've written this. I wrote this last year. I don't think it's that big of a deal to get down to 130. I was a little surprised they kept it as high as they did.
Yeah.
Under Rhule, but I think he's found a way to do that makes sense. But like I'm not big into the giant roster thing. I've never been really into that personally.
Well, if you can make it work for you, then it works. But how have you seen? And you wrote about this a little bit in your rewind today. It's interesting how the two different athletic directors that Rhule has worked for now have kind of approached this, and Trev had some bigger picture, like holistic athletic department thoughts, and they wanted the roster to be trimmed up a little bit more. And it feels like Dannen has said, it's yours, and we'll figure it out. Kind of like, is that the correct sort of definition of how those guys have sort of approached it? And like, obviously Rhule prefers the larger roster here, but it's interesting to see how the ADs have kind of handled it.
Right. So you go back to Bill Moose, and in order to accommodate Scott Frost's roster size, he basically introduced a developmental swim program and sort of a developmental group of cross-country runners in order to add roster size so that Scott Frost could have all of his walk-ons to get the program up to 150. Frost had the practice strategy in mind, right? Now, my sense is that Scott wasn't necessarily thrilled with some of the walk-ons he was getting. Like, they weren't as good of players as he anticipated they would be, but Moose accommodated that. And then when Moose was let go, Trev came in, and he he put up with what Scott was doing for a while because he kind of had to. But there was also a sense of, we're going to have to figure this out as we move on. We're not going to continue to have a developmental swimming team that doesn't practice with the regular team just so we can accommodate more football players on campus. And I think he would probably communicated that to Rhule. And then I think Dannen has shifted course. Although it's not going to happen. I mean, Trev Alberts went to Texas A&M, and that's that. What we've seen since Trev left is a huge shift in the way that Matt Rhule viewed things and the way Trev viewed things. So because they're doing what Matt Rhule wants now. They're all stumping for 1890. They're running this giant roster. They've hired more and more staff. I suspect there's other things coming down the pike. And, I think that's just where they are now. And I don't, it'll be a question for a different day, maybe months, years down the line, but like, what would Dannen say no to? I don't know. And to be clear, let's be clear, like being good at football is really, really important in this current moment in college football, in college athletics. Like having a really good football program is a big deal. So I can understand why he desires to empower Rhule and all of those things. I think there's been obviously a pretty clear shift, and Dannen's a big time AD, but he's more of a coach's AD, and their background suggests why. Dannen came from a more modest background for sure, whereas Trev Alberts was royalty from the time, he played with a broken arm in the Orange Bowl, and he won the Buckets. And I mean, he's been, he was minted around here for a really long time. So he was in some ways able to develop a different vision for how things should work. Whereas I think Dannen's had to be more pragmatic along the way. And, that probably accounts for the difference in who they are. It's the difference in the stadium. We're hearing things like, does it help us win? And is this what we want to do at this moment? And I don't really think Trev cared that much about that. I think what he wanted to do was set the program up for the future, and to take care of the fans. And I just don't know that that's a priority for most athletic directors because they follow the money. And so there's differences for sure. There's just big differences between the two. And I think most Nebraska fans probably would prefer the Dannen approach. They probably like the pragmatic approach, but we'll see how it all shakes out.
It's interesting though, because what we don't have a grasp on yet is how Dannen sort of interacts with other sports, and like if there's those kinds of requests from other sports, and what it looks like how far are you willing to go for men's or women's basketball or volleyball or whatever it might be. I don't know that, like Sam, I don't know that we've approached that yet. I don't know if we've gotten to any of those questions yet, but it'll be interesting to see what happens when we do, because the only one that he's really, talked about so far is football and the NIL and the big picture stuff and what happens next there. But be curious to see how the other sports sort of react to that and what happens as a result of it.
Yeah, agreed. Baseball's gotten to a situation where they're selling the beer there now, and they're trying to pool those resources together to get some of the features and amenities that they want for players on that Haymarket Park campus, if you will. And so that's something that obviously had run aground with Trev. He didn't like he didn't like the booze deal with the Salt Dogs, so they weren't selling booze. And then when Dannen took over, they were selling booze. So things happen quickly, and there's a whole bunch of different things there. There is a difference philosophically, and yeah, you're right. We'll see how it all nets out. They went and got contract extensions for Fred and for all these. I mean, they went at it real fast to get all those folks extended and get raises, and so they're trying to take care of everybody and get things in place and move forward together. And again, we'll see what happens. Like, I feel like we're back kind of with, like, not exactly where Moose was. I think Dannen's a little bit more disciplined, especially with what he says.
Definitely.
We're kind of back to, well, I mean, if the coach wants a 7-year contract, they can have that. And I think Trev was going to be much more streamlined and tougher on those things, and probably over time would have rubbed some coaches the wrong way.
Sure.
That probably would have happened. But of course, the coaches always want the sun and the moon and the stars. That's what makes them coaches. That's what makes them competitive.
Yeah, I don't know what, like, from drawing the comparison to Moose or whatever. I don't know that was a bad idea. Like, that's not what that's not. I don't think what you're trying to say.
It was a bad idea to get Scott Frost a 2-year contract extension midway through a losing season because boosters wanted you to do it.
But it's not a bad idea to support coaches.
Sure,
in general.
Yeah, but there's all kinds of like Oklahoma just did it with Brent Venables. There's no reason to do any of that. It's hard. You got to stare down your boosters and say, no, we're not doing it. And when he wins, I guess, we'll hit our pocketbook. But, they're doing it with Venables, too. And he hasn't really won anything yet.
No.
But that's what a lot of them do. Because they're like, well, you're the rich person and I'm not. And so, we'll do what you want to do. And then, but you're good for the money if we want to get rid of this person. And, all those kinds of things, when they come to pass, you've got to try to find a way to navigate it and to negotiate smart contracts. And what's interesting is there was a lot of hue and cry at the time that Tim Miles only got a 1-year extension. I remember people were very upset that he didn't get his 3 or 4 years, but the reality is he didn't pay it off, and they didn't win very much the next year, and he got fired, and they saved $4 or $5 million as a result of that. And that was one of the better financial decisions Bill Moose made. It was unpopular with a lot of fans and with some media, but it ended up saving Nebraska and their boosters a lot of money.
Yeah. Interesting. Sam McKewon from the Omaha World-Herald. All right, Sam, always appreciate the conversation, my friend. Enjoy the games tonight, and we'll talk to you next week.
Take care.
Sam McKewon. Fascinating stuff. Yeah, I feel like when we sort of mapped this out at the beginning, and Dannen came in such a Mr. Yogurt, I suppose we should call him.
There you
Sorry.
go. Okay, now I know what we're talking about.
Mr. Yogurt came in it was such an odd time, and they acted quickly, and people were still up in arms about the whole Trev leaving thing, and it was like, what's this guy all about? And I think we've gotten a much better sense of that now in 2 months, maybe a little bit more than that. What was it? No, it's more than that because Trev was gone before the tournament.
Mm-hmm.
So more than 3 months.
Yeah. Yeah, do what you want.
It's his approach is definitely like I don't think that's exactly right, but it's pretty close to descriptive, and it's in I think to put it together, Trev had this like holistic athletic department wide. How does this affect this? We want to be successful in everything. And not that Dannen doesn't want to be successful in everything, but he has been a good, he's been a listener to his coaches and then an actor for, I think, his coaches so far here. And by his coaches, I mean Rhule. I mean, he said it right when he got here. He was like, hey, I don't really know, paraphrasing obviously, but I don't really know what's going on here. So I'm leaning on other people to kind of tell me the lay of the land. And we said it right at the time. It's kind of Rhule's reins here.
Definitely seems like he's giving him the keys to the castle. And
so here's the thing. I
haven't seen him interacting with a lot of other sports and their coaches.
So here's the thing. And not that he's not. Once again, I'm not trying to say that he's not. I'm sure he is.
I just haven't seen it.
But Rhule is obviously, more out there. So when Sam draws the comparison with Moose and how he's like, it was kind of, to put it, I guess, really, broadly, I think Moose thought, hey, I hired these coaches. I hired Scott Frost. I hired Fred Hoiberg. I did my job here. This thing is going to run itself. We are going to win because I just hired these dudes. Mm-hmm. I'm the GOAT, You're essentially handing the reins over to these people to make decisions, hoping that theoretically, that they'll win enough games, and you keep them happy by continuing to give them what they want. The key here is Rhule, because the key was last time Frost. Didn't work. Turns out Scott Frost actually needed a boss. Does Matt like, is Matt Rhule the kind of guy where you're like, yeah, I feel comfortable with I feel comfortable with him speaking for the athletic department, for him making decisions on this much grander, larger scale stuff, like, stuff like grass in the stadium, stuff like what to do with the South Side, or big picture ideas. You feel comfortable with that? Do we have enough evidence? I do.
I think I do.
I do, because he feels like a guy who's going to have the program's best interests at heart, and the kids' best interests at heart, all the way down to his core. I think Scott wasn't that far off from that, but I think where he erred is that he was building his program in the image of something he romanticized a little bit too much, and was just basically trying to make a mirror image of what he saw when he was a player here. Rhule is making this up on the spot. He's making constant decisions. What's best? Where do we go here? What do we do here? Who do we pick up, and who do we let go? That's on the fly. And he's able to make these decisions because he's done it before. We just talked about it last week. Think about how the image in which he created his program at Temple, the image in which he created his program at Baylor, and the relationships that he developed, and the style, all the way down to the style of football that they played, right? It was adapted to the spot, to the place, for the people, right? And I think it's the same here. And so he's been able to show over a period of time that he can kind of make those decisions. And so I'm okay with it, like I said, but know that it is on, it's on him, because the athletic department, the athletic director is going to give him whatever he needs. That's at least the sense that we have so far.
Seems that way.
Curious to see what happens with other sports, but yeah. All right, we can continue to discuss that if you want when we return. We will go full until 2, by the way, today. Josh and Jack will be at the Baseball Village starting at 2.
Not me.
It is indeed hot. I'm getting 94 on my watch right now. Should I read you the weather report from this morning?
Yeah, we just talked to Sam. Let's talk to Sam's brother.
That's right. I should have asked him about that, by the way. The main weather story today will be the heat and humidity. This is directly from consulting meteorologist Marty McKewon. Temperatures today will push 100 degrees in Omaha, with heat indexes from 105 to 110 from 2 to 7. So we're about to go right into that. The heat index could still be as high as 95 degrees at 9 p.m. A gusty south wind will help take the edge off the conditions, but nonetheless, for fans arriving early to downtown Omaha, it will be very uncomfortable. An isolated thunderstorm cannot be ruled out from 5 to 10. The probability, however, is only about 20%.
This from ESPN.
Yes, what are they saying?
Feels like temperature of 104 at the time of first pitch for MCWS Game 3.
Yeah.
And then they put the A&M helmet and the Tennessee helmet and the championship trophy.
And they were all on fire.
On what looks to be the surface of Mars.
I'd say that's pretty well done. It's pretty well done.
Now it's just an orange glow from the sun, but it looks like Matt Damon in The Martian is going to pop up in the background of that at any second.
You know what'd be funny? I haven't even checked the weather beyond today. Is it going to get like cool all of a sudden? Yep. Amazing.
Tomorrow.
Thursday. Well, no, tomorrow's still hot.
Oh.
Wednesday's still pretty hot. Thursday is a high of 77 with some rain.
Let's go.
We are like
77.
just, and I know a lot of people don't trust the old iPhone weather app, but here it is again. So over the next several days after the College World Series leaves town, starting tomorrow, 95, 87, 77, 89, 80, 76, 84, 86, 79. Basically low to mid 80s. Starting tomorrow.
How's your yard, by the way?
A little burnt.
Oh, really?
A little burnt.
Okay.
It surprisingly has not held up. Like, remember how we were talking about how our lawns were all lush and thick, and it goes pretty quick.
Oh,
that water gets sucked out pretty quick.
I'm overdue for a mow, so
yeah,
maybe that will reveal some patches.
I was able to get a mow in on Saturday morning.
Okay,
and so we're hanging in there. We're doing okay. Are we still in a drought?
Who knows?
Or do we get rid of that with all that? Whatever.
Let's get Marty on the show.
Yeah. We'll talk to Sam. All right. Back after this on 1620 The Zone.
Previously on The Crossover.
I opened up my fortune cookie last night, and on the front it says, here you can download a bunch of music. And then on the back, there's a QR code for Napster.
Yeah. Fortune cookies used to be fun, whimsical. At the end of your chicken fried rice, you're like, boop, boop, boop.
Boop, boop, boop. That's exactly what I did
we had
last night.
Chinese the other night. I don't think we ever got fortune cookies.
Even worse.
Mornings with Sharp and Hanley. The Connor Happer Show. Unsportsmanlike conduct. 6A to 6P. 1620. The Zone.